You're listening to the Coach's Journey podcast, exposing the struggles and celebrating the successes in the life of coaches who are action takers and creating authentic impact in today's world. Whether you're just starting out, expanding your reach, or exploding your impact, you're in the right place right now. Stay tuned and be sure to subscribe to this podcast. Now, here are your hosts of the Coach's Journey podcast.
What's up, Coaches Nation? Another amazing week in the day of a life of a coach. Both Faisal and myself and you as our amazing listener. We're excited to see you. I'm Dr. Sherry Flewellen, and I'm here with our amazing co-hosts, Faisal and San, on the Coach's Journey podcast. Today, we are going to tackle one of the really critical pieces to get dialed in as a coach. Coaching versus consulting. A lot of times when we talk with coaches, and we kind of get into what they've done, and I have totally done this in the past and probably still do at times. When somebody asks us a question or is struggling in something, we can kind of have this urge to jump in and like, oh, well, you should do this or this or this or this and try this because it worked for us or because it worked for the last client. But one of the powerful aspects of coaching is that we get to draw out from our clients their own perspective about what might be their best solution, even in the midst of them not really knowing what that solution is in the moment. It's an opportunity to kind of co-create. And the thing about co-creation is that the answer is, I heard this quote, I've heard this multiple times, but I literally just heard it again yesterday. The answers in coaching can only be good as the questions that are asked. So today, Faisal and I are going to spend time talking about how do we ask powerful questions and what might some of those powerful questions be? Because one of the keys to leveling up is being able to be attuned to what the client is saying and then being able to formulate and to ask a really powerful question that can take them beyond their current framework or their current mindset. So that is where we're going to go today. I know that you're going to get a lot of value out of this. So stay tuned, stick with us, and we'd love to hear your comments about how you ask powerful questions. And maybe, we're going to give some examples of some questions that we use. We'd love to hear some of the examples of questions that you've used that have worked really, really well. So, Faisal, questions in coaching.
Yeah, it's. I think that's our bread and butter. It comes from powerful questions. I think before, because I can. So here's the cool thing. So I can give you a set of questions that might be really powerful, quote unquote, really powerful, but it might not land at all when you're asking me or anybody is asking them. So I'm actually less interested in what kind of question. We'll give some examples of questions, but I think the power of the questions comes from the coach itself, because a few things need to be set up there. As like, we don't want to assume that, because I've gone the same questions that other very advanced coaches had asked, and I've learned it in these seminars. And then I would go and ask the client, it wasn't landing, wasn't working as well. And I was like, what the hell's going on? And I realized that a few things needed to be in place. First of all, presence is a huge piece, because if your thought is saying, well, what is the next question I'm going to ask? And you're not paying attention to the client, it's probably not the right question. And so doing it, and that just means that before you get into any kind of session, your energy matters a lot, which means where is your energy focused on? Are you dealing with a bunch of stuff? Your thoughts are all over the place, your energy all over the place. And are you doing any kind of prep work to deal with that? And that becomes really important. And when you're in the session, are you really focused on the client, or are you focused on on asking the right questions? Because if you're focused on asking the right questions, you're probably not going to ask the right questions.
I think for me, that's one of the most anxiety-provoking aspects of coaching, is this balance between I want to be fully present And sometimes when I'm fully present and then the client gets done talking, I'm like, oh crap, like I don't know where I'm going to go now. Like, and I feel like I'm scrambling, like, trying to figure out where to take it. And so for me, that's probably the biggest challenge I have is staying present and having a plan for where we're going to go or where the next thing is. So that's an interesting dichotomy, or not a dichotomy, but duality.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it just, again, it comes down to, so if a client is sharing something, I guarantee you, like within what they're sharing, there is something to dig into. There is something to go towards. And if somebody actually doesn't know, a coach doesn't know which way to go, I think the best way is, so actually yesterday, I'll share this example. Yesterday, I had a discovery call with someone. And I've known this person for a while, and I had booked this strategy call with him, and I knew a little bit about his background. So I asked him, like, how's the family, everything, and what are you excited about? And as he starts sharing, he gives me the news that they just got the news that a couple of weeks ago his 9-year-old daughter got leukemia.
Oh my goodness!
And I'm just listening to that, and I don't know which direction to take that conversation to, because originally when we had booked the session, he was looking for some clarity, and that's the direction I was planning to go towards. But I simply am like, you know what, that's incredibly tough. Thank you for sharing that. I know we were thinking about going towards clarity that you were seeking in your life, and this new news has come in. What would serve you today? Because I really don't know which direction will support you. Mm-hmm. And he literally laid it out where he needed help. And that kind of, it's important to know that we don't need to know which way to take the clients. A lot of times, if we're confused, we can just literally say that. What would actually serve you? And I've also tested this on my recurring sessions. So I used to do weekly sessions. Now I think the recurring sessions that I have, where the recurring, it's biweekly is the most I would do, which are fewer clients that are left for me. Most of my one-on-one is actually one-on-one monthly. So it's actually hard to kind of follow a framework with that. Mm-hmm. So I actually spend about 10, 15 minutes checking in and seeing what's going on with different parts of their life. And then I'll literally ask you, like, among all these things, what do you think will support you most? What would you like to create? What would serve you in our call today? And they get to make the decision. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting because I was actually scared of that. I'm like, well, I don't want to go there because I have a framework. And it's like in a month has passed by, a lot of things happen, and I don't know what their priority is right now. I could give them the topic or the framework, and it might or might, and I will share that. But would this serve you, or would you like to go through one of the things that you shared? And almost always the client will be like, yeah, I'd like to focus on this because it's the area I'm having difficulty.
Yeah.
And I want to work through.
As you were talking about that, it reminded me of some of the experiences I had as a psychologist. And I've certainly grown over the last number of years as I've kind of transitioned out of one field and into the related field of coaching. And so I think it's around the expectation or the expectations we set with our clients around the purpose and function of coaching. And one of the things I love about coaching, and a lot of the coaches that we surround ourselves with, the folks in our community, in the coaching mastery community, is there's a very intentional purpose around coaching, which sometimes any therapist listening to this, certainly it's not all the time, but sometimes there's an ambiguity around the purpose of mental health counseling or mental health therapy. People go because they're supposed to go, or they know, but there's not necessarily a lot of clarity as to the actual outcome, which is kind of interesting. Anyway, the reason I bring that up is simply that I've had quite a few clients that have told me that they would go to somebody for help and talking with them, and the person would listen, but there wasn't a lot of direction outside of that. And so they felt like they were sharing their story and sharing all these things going on, but then were left unchanged and kind of in their own, in their original issue, original problem. So I think this again highlights the importance of questions. We need to be present. We need to listen well. But then the questions that we choose to ask and the direction, because our questions ultimately focus our clients in a direction. And certainly we can change that as we go, but our questions are what lead our clients to potential change. Yeah. Opens the door for a different perspective, kind of a bunch of different things. So having intentionality as a coach around the goals of the coaching and with the client, I think is pretty critical as well, and ultimately guides the questions in addition.
Yeah, and that's what I think coaching, if you're looking at it, and there's this one interview I watched of Brendon Burchard. Forget who is it? With this lady, forget her name, but she said something about coaching, and he's like, listen, I don't get paid to teach people. I get paid to help people create results. Mm-hmm. That was Brendon Burchard's answer around what differentiates coaching. Like all the concepts and everything that in personal growth and development, leadership, all that stuff, people can find it anywhere. Yeah. And especially when you start to work with people who have been on that journey for a little bit, you'll find that they know quite a bit. You don't need to. And I've been in different situations where I've been coached. A lot of coaches will kind of hammer in concepts without assuming that I don't know that, for example. With me, and then almost always the feedback was that, how did you know that I didn't know anything about that? Mm-hmm. Or I didn't know it at the level that you did, and it sounded more like advice, but there was no question around it well, how would this support me in my life?
So Faisal, as you're coaching with a client, and let's say that they bring up an issue, let's do something super tangible. Like, let's say they're struggling with their weight. That's part of their overall. I just can't seem to lose weight, and your mind or a coach's mind might be wondering, well, do they know like some of the logistics around nutrition and around exercise and how those actually impact one's weight? So those are like the logistical teaching moments. And then there's certainly some other questions around that. How would you marry the two? Or how would you deal with the fact that maybe there's some knowledge that they're missing, but you're not sure if they're missing it, yeah, versus, leaving that portion out?
I think, that just that question has the answer within it. I would want to know more. And one of the easiest questions you can ask is like, what have you tried so far? And they will tell you what they've tried. And as they start to share, you will know that what's happening, and then they'll share their frustrations. And then you can also ask the question in terms of, so after they shared, I've tried this and this, and then I've tried this 5 different things. I'm like, okay, great. What has worked so far in that process? Because I guarantee you there's some things that have worked and they either are not consistent with it, something that is off with the way they're doing it, or they haven't focused on it, or they don't have habits or reminders around it. So they will say a bunch of stuff that has worked. Like, do you think you're doing that right now? And almost always, this is the most amazing thing, that people are not consistent with what they're doing. And then you can go towards what doesn't work, what hasn't worked. And then you can go towards, and then within that discovery process, you will get a good picture of what they've tried, what hasn't worked, what are their frustrations, what can work. And from that process, you will know which direction to go. But it's very hard to say which direction this is going to go, because they might have a gap in knowledge. And that's where you can share perspective, you can share insight, you can share a story, but you will still need to go back to them and say, how do you think this applies to your life? Yeah. How do you think this applies to your context? And that's the differentiation between coaching and just giving advice or perspective.
It's really interesting. In the Coaching Mastery community, we have a coaching chain where those of us in the membership, we coach somebody for like a period of time and we get coached, and then we continually rotate. So we're always getting coached by somebody else every few months to be able to expand our perspective of what it's like to be coached by different things. And we're able to coach other people. And so we can mix things up and we get the benefit of different personalities and different life experiences. It's pretty cool. One of the first coaches, I think it might actually have been the first coach that I was coached by in the Coaching Mastery community. And it was her, I was her first coaching client. She's in the health industry. She's a very, very good professional, has done a lot of work, but it was just kind of adding this piece to her business. And I remember that one of the things she would do is she would kind of, she would talk at me, kind of problem solve, but kind of telling me, oh, well, you should try this and this and this. And she is extremely knowledgeable about, the health industry and the things to do to get the results and stuff like that. Well, I have the privilege of getting coached by her again right now a few years later, and it's a very different experience. She is doing an amazing job at doing exactly what you're talking about, Faisal, and asking me like, well, what have you tried? What are you working on? What do you think is worth continuing? What do you think, you want to put more effort into doing, or what do you think, isn't working? And so she asked me all those questions. So it's really cool because I've been able to see her growth, and I've given her that feedback of where she started out as a newer coach, where it's easy to just kind of give examples, give answers. Also, as a newer coach, and again, I mean, we can fall into this no matter how new or seasoned we are. But sometimes it's easy to think, oh, well, if I just tell them, so give them some answers, then I will be more credible, or people will look at me as, more like I know what I'm doing, rather than asking a lot of questions, which can leave a vulnerability in our confidence and credibility in the beginning of our journey. So anyway, that's just something I've noticed, the kind of the growth in this coach. And I think it's just easy for us to fall into that. I'll just, if I tell them this and this, and we have this vision that everything's going to change in their life, and they're going to be like, Sherry, you're an amazing coach. I love you,
Yeah. And so two things in there. One, the coach in that picture is focused on themselves, that I'll be amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not focused on the client. And second, and this is the problem with advice typically, like even outside of coaching, like when you meet somebody like a relative or somebody, you share a problem, you're talking about something, all of a sudden you hear like a barrage of, you should do this, you should do this, you should do that. The problem that, like, there's nothing wrong with the advice itself. The problem is it's like throwing a dart in the dark and hoping that it'll hit.
Yeah.
You don't know what, like, the context, you don't know what's actually happening. And while consulting can actually be very powerful within coaching, because I actually went through a certification recently, it was called Certified Business Coach by EverCoach Mindvalley. And what they've done is they've combined coaching and consulting. But you'll find, so half the program was focused on the coaching principles. The other was most consulting with teams and corporate organizations. So what they found was that coaching can be really powerful to kind of help them think through their culture and their teams, how they're setting up their systems. But to accelerate the process, they do need some key foundational principles in what works in business to kind of move them along.
Yeah.
So we would still bring, for example, ideas around how a vision can help them move something forward. So the consulting piece is the vision, that we will walk you through this thing. But before that, you're doing a lot of discovery around what's happening with your vision, or do you know it? When you interview every team member, you find out like what's happening in their mind, or they're clear about it before you dump a tool.
Mm-hmm.
But that becomes a perspective, a tool that helped them kind of accelerate the process. And I found the reason why I went towards that, because I found a lot of coaching is like that sometimes, is that especially if you're working with a niche, you will find certain patterns. you'll find certain patterns where they have similar. For example, I work with multifamily investors. One of the big patterns is that they don't know how to connect and build teams. It's like 90% of them. They don't know how to connect with other people, and they have all sorts of reservation. We talked about that in the collaboration conversation that we had. So one of the areas at some point I will go into is around teams. I will actually, that's kind of a lead-in question because I know which direction it'll get. So that's a quality of question. I've understood that based on the number of times I've heard the same things within that industry. So it sort of is a consulting area, but I'm starting with a question to take them in that direction, ask what's happening in that area. And almost always I find a lot of challenges in that space, which doesn't even relate to the team. It relates to their own challenges of how they approach, how they're even thinking about forming teams, because they have a lot of reservations around it. So that can be a really powerful conversation for them. But I already know what's happening. That's one kind of quality of question, is that it's a leading type of question. But then a lot of coaching in the beginning, as you're starting off, if you don't know anything about the industry, if you don't know anything about the person, a lot of it is very open-ended questions to understand people. Yeah. And a lot of it might look like, what are you trying to create in your life? Tell me a little bit about your vision. Tell me a little bit about your goals. What makes you happy in life? What do you think when you think of purpose? Like, these kind of questions are very open-ended. You don't know where it's going to go. But once you get the answers, then you can start to kind of focus on some areas that you know are pain points for people that they are working through.
Yeah. And another aspect of kind of exploration is where a client, what roles and responsibilities and aspects of their life are that they feel personally responsible for. Two specific examples: coaching a gentleman who's definitely a high performer. He's transitioning in his life out of one type of career into another, and he's got a lot of concern about finances. And so part of my question was like, okay, well, how do you see your role, or what do you want your role to be as head of the household? And how does that play into the finances, and kind of having a conversation around that? Because I could, as he was talking, there was, a few things I could pick up on. I'm like, but I don't want to assume that he is fully seeing himself the way that I am interpreting that, or that, some values that I might have about my marriage and my household that, would fit and play into his. So getting more, really diving into understanding the roles and responsibilities that he ascribes to. And then another example, yesterday I was talking with, I was doing some consulting with another coach, and she was sharing with me a client and some challenges she's having. And I could see that she had a very specific interpretation around how this mother was responding in her family. And so part of my consultation with this other gal was helping her develop questions so that she can then better understand the roles and responsibilities of this mother. Like, what are the motivations for the behavior? And so I think some of the questions around understanding the values and what's important, and what one's expectation is, or what client's expectation is, and how they function in these different areas, can be a really powerful way of kind of uncovering some of the some of their motivators, as well as maybe some aspects that aren't serving them, but maybe they don't even realize it.
Yeah, I love that. And it's like a dance between what the open-ended questions, and then as you ask more, you find out a little bit more, and then you have, and this is generally how coaching works, is that you ask a lot of open-ended questions to get to understand what they're trying to do. And that's where kind of disconnections show up. It's like they're saying something, but then you can also check in. So I'll give you an example. So again, one of my discovery calls this week. So as I was going into one of the things I like to do is, especially the first one, I want to know more about people's vision. And first of all, I want to know, like, what are they picturing their life to be ideally? Because everybody has a certain all of us have an ideal version of what we want to create, who we want to be, what we want to contribute, how we want to interact with people. So within that, when I'm asking them, I always check in. So for example, I was asking like, what is an ideal version of a relationship with your wife? Because I knew that was a challenge area. You talked about he wanted to go, and he described all that. I asked him first from his point of view, how do you see that interaction with your wife in that ideal life? And what he described was that, well, I want to feel loved. I want to feel supported. I want to feel understood. And these are very vague concepts. And then I had to kind of dig deeper. I'm like, how would you feel supported? Like, what would an ideal version? Give me an example. Well, if she understands that in business, I'm doing all this stuff and I'm doing all this stuff for our home, and sometimes I get busy. And so I want some understanding around that. And so what would she need to say or do for you to get that? What he said was, well, just an acknowledgement that you're working hard and I get it. And sometimes I spend long hours, but I appreciate you actually trying to spend time with us. And so that would do that. And that would help you feel supported. Like, yeah. Have you explicitly asked for that? No.
Ding, ding, ding. Oh.
So do you see that there's a problem?
Actually have to ask my spouse for what I want.
And it's like, it's one of those areas where, because we've been in this world, and this is where your work will matter. Because if you haven't done your work in your relationships, you will not know to catch that.
Yeah.
If you're hoping that the other side will know what you want, it won't work. But these are very basic things in communication. So, and so when I asked him, I'm like, okay, so do you know that? And he's like, well, no. And then his challenge became around, well, I don't know how to express that without her being defensive. And then we went towards a different direction. Like, why do you think she feels defensive? Well, she feels like I don't appreciate her. When was the last time you showed appreciation in the way that she wants? She's like, well, I struggle with that part. And then that's where it was interesting. And this is where coaching can become more personal. It takes like a turn maybe away from therapy in a sense. And this is maybe my style, but I'm fairly open. I literally shared my screen and I showed a text that I sent to my wife that day. I don't know how that happened. It was that morning. Coincidentally, I said, and that's an area I struggle with too. So I've had to kind of force myself to a couple of times a week, I'll send something. And it's not like I don't mean it. Like I'll get it, but, and I've had these conversations with my wife. I'm like, I think of all these ways that I'm grateful for you, but it's all in my head.
Yeah.
I never say it out loud. So whenever I'm thinking those things now, I will just put it down as a note and I'll just send it to her in text. And I literally shared my screen, showed the text, and I'm like, and then I showed her response too. And her response was she was having a hard time receiving it. She was like, it was very easy for me to dismiss it, but I really appreciate it. It made my day. So when I shared that, I didn't say, well, this is what you should do. I'm like, do you think something like that would support you? And how would that look like in your relationship? He's like, I could do something like that. Mm-hmm. Okay, how would you remind yourself to do that? Because you don't have a habit to do that. And then he went to her setting up a couple of alarms. Once he said that, I asked him, we're going to take a couple of minute break. Can you send a text right now? Something from your heart that you appreciate about her. And he did. After that, he felt amazing.
I have had alarms on my phone for that exact reason. Because I think great thoughts in my brain, don't always articulate it. And there was one time my husband was sitting next to me and the alarm came on and it literally said like, send JP a loving text. And he looks at it and he's like, that's what you're doing? I was like, oh, you found me out. But you gotta be intentional.
Yeah, and so we live in this mythical world, and this is we've grown up with fairy tales and stories and movies that kind of give the wrong picture of how it actually works in real life. And once you get into a relationship, there's going to be roses and daisies. You're going to be in love, there is that period for the first about 6 months, and after you get out of that and you go to the day-to-day stuff, you forget about all that. You're going to be focused on your work. She's going to be focused on something else. He's going to be focused on something else, and you will not remember. So that's where a lot of weird things come up. So what comes up is our automatic thinking. And a lot of coaches know that we all have a program, a normal way of, a subconscious way of behaving consistently. And where do we pick that up? In our early environment. It's been modeled for us. Whatever habits that have been modeled for us, that's what we do. So I have a hard time with this because I never saw my parents sharing affection, ever. Like I didn't even see them hold hands. So for me, my bar was that if I leave her alone, I'm doing pretty good. And she's sitting there, it's like, he doesn't appreciate me. I'm like, I'm amazing in comparison to my parents.
That's hilarious.
But that's a pretty low bar. So then how do we change that? Well, we train ourselves to be different. And if you don't have it inside of you, you need external reminders. Yes. You need intentionality. You need all sorts of habits that take a little bit of time. And as you do these things, you get feedback. You get feedback, and the feedback itself continues. Now, what happens with our clients is that they will say that conceptually they know this, but they don't actually do it. Yeah. They might do it once in a while, but not consistently enough for it to pick up traction. So this becomes really important. Like when you go into something like this, the client will tell you where they need help. Like, and this is like the most freeing thing for me as a coach, that I don't need to know anything before jumping on a call, to be honest. Because human beings come with plenty of challenges and problems.
I love that. I love that. So just, you can never go wrong with when you're asking questions. Tell me more. Tell me a little bit more about that. If you're never sure what, or if you're not sure what the next step is, just ask an open-ended question to get more information about whatever it is they just said.
Yeah. And like, let's take worst case scenarios. Like clients share something, to the quality of how I shared before in the beginning, is that they share something and you're completely stumped. Like you can literally repeat that. Like this is one of the best tools in coaching, is that you be like, and you talked about interpretation, because you will be interpreting it in a certain way and you don't know which direction to go. It's like, okay, so this is what I'm hearing. When you're sharing this challenge with me, this is what I'm hearing. Is that correct? First of all, you're checking. And here's what, and you can even share your assumptions. This actually works very good for you, because if you can extrapolate, if you can kind of give them an interpretation of what they're doing and what's not working, and you know that might be true because it fits into a pattern. First, you're not assuming, you're just saying like, here's what I'm thinking, and I could be completely wrong. What I'm thinking is that even though you have the general intention to be there, present with your family, with your wife, to be appreciative, be supportive, your focus is on your work. So you will keep that intention for a little bit, but then you lose traction, and then you get focused there and you lose the habit after a while. Would you say that's accurate? And they will say yes. And you're actually understanding them more as you're saying that. And then from there, you can ask like, well, how could you improve? And that's just a simple example, but clients know much more about their life than you do.
Absolutely.
No matter how much you know about how a specific area, such as how fear works or how vision works or how goals work, clients understand their life. They have much more data than you do. So I would always want to go back to them, like, how would this work in your life? I'll give them some perspective. I'll give them some interpretations, assumptions, but then I check in with them consistently to see where they are.
So listener, as you're hearing these, we would love to get feedback on what questions you have found powerful, and if there's anything new or expanded from what you currently do that you're hearing today, where you're like, ooh, that's good. I can use that, or I'm going to use that on my next client. Would love to get feedback on it. And of course, this is a topic that could go on forever, because there's an endless number of questions that one can use. But we're definitely trying to come up with and share with you a handful of extremely powerful questions that you can have in your back pocket The more that you use them, the more they're just going to roll off your tongue. Especially as a newer coach, if you are a newer coach, you might find this to be a big challenge where, again, part of your mental faculties in the session are spent thinking about where I'm going to go, think about what the question, whereas the other part of you is just trying to stay in the moment. That does get easier. And if you can have like a list of 5 to 10 questions that you just know at the back of your hand that are super applicable, that can help free you up a little bit in your kind of with your active mind, so that you can be more present and you can be with the clients a little bit more than kind of in your brain.
Yeah. And I love that. And just a couple of things for coaches who are starting new, like you said, I love what you said, is that in the beginning, when we're starting anything, it takes a lot more bandwidth. You're thinking about too many aspects of it because it's not automatic yet. When I'm in the session, I'm only thinking about the client for the most part, because I've already thought through this in 1,000 other sessions. Mm-hmm. And in the beginning, when I was starting, I used to have my framework in front of me. Sometimes I still do with certain topics that I want to go into. And I'll have some 1 or 2 or 3 questions in there. And I would still not have too much in there, but just 1 or 2, just as a guiding principle, just in case you kind of feel stumped or something. And that's okay. And you can literally let the client know too, my framework is here, so I can guide you in a better way, in case they see your eyes going here and there. So that's completely okay. The question is how. I think the effort needs to be more towards the client and your presence towards the client. Because if you're focused on the client, if you're present with the client, you will notice a lot of things. You will notice body language shifts if it's video. You'll notice tonality shifts if it's audio, and on video, you can notice both of those. You will notice pauses. You will notice emotions. There's so many things in there other than the words that they're saying. And your presence will pick up all that stuff. But if it's not there, then you're focused on trying to figure out what to do. Then that's going to hinder it. And in the beginning, it'll be a dance between the two. Everybody finds their balance as you do this. And there's this phrase that I heard a while ago, is that trust the process. Mm-hmm. The process of coaching is actually fairly simple. It's a dialogue. You're asking questions and they're sharing, and you're asking more questions, and there might be perspective shared, tools shared, but it comes out of the conversation itself. There's actually not much you can prepare ahead. You can have certain topics and you can prepare that, like, hey, we're going to talk about this theme, such as, let's say, productivity, or your inner child, or or influence, or whatever it might be, but you have no idea where the direction will go. And then to me, at least, that's very freeing.
Absolutely.
And that's why the simplest questions are actually the better questions. Like you said, like, how would you like this to turn out? What else? What are 2 things you could do to improve this a little bit more? Why do you feel like you're not doing this? What else could you do in this context? Where else can you apply this thing? Like, these are very simple questions. They don't require a lot of crafting. Yeah. But those are usually better questions. I mean, I literally read this book. I have it. No, it was called, what is it? It's by Steve Chandler. It's a newer one. The Book of Choices. Crazy Good by Steve Chandler. And he's talking about his coach, which is, I think he's a very famous coach, Dan something. Anyway, so he was having a challenge committing to his girlfriend to ask in marriage. And literally, Steve Hardison asked him a few questions, like, so his question is usually, what would you like to create? And it's like, well, I'd love to be able to commit to this person, but I feel like I don't know her enough. And he just asked a few questions like, what's stopping you from committing? Well, I don't, what else do you want to know about her? There was these are like blocks he was setting for himself. By the time he was done within the first 15, 20 minutes, he's like, okay, so when would you like to ask her? He's always like, okay. And then now it's done. This part was really funny in the book. And I was in the plane too, and I was laughing like no tomorrow. So he was done that. He made the commitment. And right after that, he's like, what else would you like to create? Are you kidding me? This is a pretty big thing.
That's awesome.
but it was really simple. Like it wasn't that, oh my God, I have to do all these magic stuff for the client for me to have an impact on the client.
Yeah.
It's actually fairly simple when you look at coaching.
Yeah. So focus on powerful questions, focus on expanding your knowledge and their knowledge of what's going on. Asking powerful questions will do all of that. And that's ultimately a significant factor of what brings about change, is because it brings about people to think about things in a different way.
Yeah.
So the power of the question leads to the power of the answer, which leads to the power of the transformation.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it comes back to the coach himself or herself. And just a couple of thoughts before we end this conversation is that we talked about presence, we talked about the quality of questions, but and I kind of alluded to this, is that the work that you do on yourself will matter a lot in coaching. So coaching is not a conceptual thing, it's actually experiential. A lot of the examples you're going to give, ideally it needs to be from your own life. It can be from other people's lives, your clients, but the client actually needs to see if you've actually done some of this work. Yeah. It doesn't mean you need to make $1 million just because your client is a millionaire, but it means that you put an effort in that area. Yeah. You've gone towards developing some kind of success and at least made an effort, and you're consistently on that path. If you're talking to somebody about relationships, you've made an honest effort in relationships, whatever the context might be. If you're talking to people about thoughts and emotions, you would have had to make some kind of effort in that area. It doesn't mean you're perfect. It just means you're on that growth path with them. That will make a huge, huge difference, because what I've seen is a lot of times coaches get stumped because that area, they're struggling with deeply in that area, and they haven't actually made a lot of headways. They're not going towards that area. They've kind of put a pause on it, and literally it would show up like there was a question. So I'm listening to this recording. A client needs support in this area around their emotions and around their relationship, and it's a very emotional path to go towards. The coach completely bypasses that. And when I asked later on, why did you do that? I felt uncomfortable going in that region, because they were uncomfortable with themselves. They didn't trust themselves in that moment. And then finally, there are other aspects of coaching, and Michael Neal in his book Super Coach, he calls that vertical coaching versus horizontal. The horizontal coaching is fairly straightforward. You kind of do some discovery, you ask a couple of questions around what they have tried, what they haven't tried, and you move towards a commitment. That's horizontal coaching, because it goes into vertical questions. You're actually challenging people's assumptions and beliefs about certain things. In fact, even their perception about certain things. You go deeper into their core values, their beliefs, their assumptions, how they look at the world, how they view themselves, how they perceive themselves. Those things, those vertical questions, not questions, but that vertical form of coaching goes much deeper. And the effect of it is a change in behavior in the life. But you might not see a direct thing from, hey, what is the next action step? It might just be that their perception completely changes, how they're looking at themselves. And there are different tools and ways of doing things, but that goes more a little bit towards the advanced. But just know that once you get like the horizontal done, then there are so many areas of coaching you can explore, and which can be really powerful. And it gets actually much more fun when you go there, because once somebody changes their perception and how they look at themselves in the world, the actual transformations come up there. Yeah. Not in the doing and the habits and all that stuff.
Yeah. Really powerful stuff. And thank you so much for engaging in this conversation with me, Faisal. And thank you as a listener to listening to this and really considering how can you take and apply some of this stuff to your own coaching journey. I think the perspective that as we do the work, we're more capable to help others do the work. The Coaching Mastery community is the sponsor for this podcast. And it's actually a virtual community that is by coaches for coaches and supporting coaches. And one of the aspects of it is that we coach each other. And it's super powerful because you're getting the benefit of being coached. So you can have the integrity to say, I believe what I do. I am being coached, but at a fraction of the price in which you would pay if you just went out in the marketplace and tried to hire a coach. And there's a bunch of other benefits that you get as a member of the Coaching Mastery community, which are really invaluable. But I just wanted to highlight that we get to improve personally and professionally by coaching and practicing and getting to try things out on each other that maybe we would never want to try out on a client because you're not really sure how it's going to go. But then you're also able to grow by being coached. So if that sounds like something that would serve you and you would be interested in, reach out to us. You can send us an email at support@coachingmastery.com, or you can go to our website, coachingmastery.com or www.coachingmastery.com. Oh my gosh.
Coachingmasterycommunity.com.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Forget that last word.
I will have the links below, so you'll be fine.
Yes, perfect.
It's there. Can I say something about that feedback process because it connects to our topic?
Of course.
So the coaching chain does something very specific. A lot of people might assume that just like one of the basic foundations of coaching is that you get a lot of practice. You consistently coach, and that'll help a lot. Now, you can coach 100 people and you might learn to coach people a certain way and it might not work very well, and you will keep doing that. So you can train yourself to coach in a horrible way. And it might not be very effective, and you might be confused as to, I literally got a message the other day from a coach saying, like, I'm doing all these calls, but I don't have, like, I'm not getting, and he thinks it's a sales problem. The way he phrased it, I knew it wasn't a sales problem, it was a coaching problem. And the reason for that is that we can train ourselves to do something horribly. And this is like in simple day-to-day life, you know, that we all develop bad habits. How do we do that? We train ourselves to develop bad habits. Coaching is very similar. So the power of the chain is incredible, because not only like the normal way of coaching you do, you're going to coach somebody who's a coach and who's done a lot of work, so it'll challenge you to a higher level. But also you're going to get feedback. Hey, this thing that you're doing is not working very well. Or this thing is incredible. Where did you learn it? And all of a sudden you develop more of a confidence in that specific tool that you thought was whatever. Or you start to think about, okay, maybe I shouldn't approach it in that manner. So just because you practice doesn't mean you're going to get better. Feedback is probably incredibly important and on this path as a coach, and not just how you're running how you're doing coaching, but also in your business as well. And that's a huge part of Coaching Mastery community, is that we're focused on constructive feedback to help us grow as coaches and as business owners. And without that, it's very, very easy to lose sight of what's important.
Absolutely. Thank you guys thank you all you coaches for listening and for consuming this and for responding and for all the ways that you interact with us. We absolutely love that. And I hope that you have an amazing week, and we will see you again next week.
All right. Bye.
You're listening to the Coach's Journey podcast.